Hello everyone and welcome to the GMC show. I am your host Akash. Today we have with ourselves one of the renowned cardiothoracic surgeon and alumnus of our own college, Dr. Vipin Zamvar. Dr. Zamvar is alumnus of batch 1982. After completing his undergraduate and postgraduate in the field of cardiothoracic surgery, he went to UK for his super specialty training in the field of cardiothoracic surgery. Dr. Zamvar is editor-in-chief of Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery and he is also past president of World Society of Cardiothoracic Surgeons. Dr. Zamvar also has on his name a medical innovation named Zamvar's Pericardial fold, about which we'll know from him later in this video. So let's get started.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Akash, for inviting me here, and thank you all of you for coming. It's a delight to be here. And actually, in this anatomy hall, I had my first lecture on the 28th of July, 1982. It was a Wednesday. That was my first day in the medical college. And somewhere over here, I was sitting, and our dean was Dr. Devdhare, and he addressed us, and he told us about Grant Medical College, and he explained to us why we were special people, why we were so privileged to be GMCITEs. You know, we were entering a very special college, and 40 years from now, 40 years from 1982, hand on heart, I can say he was absolutely correct. You know, all of you are so lucky that you have got admissions in this Grant Medical College, and you will realize this decades later.
So how is your life at UK, everyday life and your family life?
So I work in the UK. I work in Edinburgh, in the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. So in a typical week, I would do about 2 or 3 thoracic surgical operations and 2 or 3 cardiac surgical operations. I have one clinic, and every once in 6 days we are on call where we provide emergency services to the patients in our area. So that is what my general clinical life is, and then of course I work for the journal and have other activities that I spend time on.
So I'm a student of this generation. And personally I'm interested in knowing of your times. Like how was the college in your times? How was the student-professor relationship? How was junior-senior interaction?
I mean, I have no experience of how medical life is now for you guys, but I can tell you we had a great time. You know, this place, this college was just fantastic, and some of the best 5 years or 6 years of my life were when I was an undergraduate student here. We had a sense of camaraderie. You know, we were friends. The friends that I made over the dissection table are still some of my best friends. You know, we've been in constant touch over the last 40 years. We were lucky to have very good teachers. You know, there's one particular anatomy teacher I remember, Dr. Dharap, Amol Dharap. He was a fantastic teacher. Maybe he is responsible. Anatomy became my favorite subject when I was a first year student. I remember 1 or 2 stories about Dr. Dharap. He always had a very good sense of humor. You know, we started our dissection in the same hall where you guys dissected, and as you know, we were 18-year-old students. We had just joined medicine and we had just made new friends. So there was one particular afternoon we were doing a dissection, and instead of he wanted us to dissect the inguinal canal and then the thigh, and then we started, after 5 or 10 minutes we stopped dissecting and started chatting, and maybe 1 or 2 hours just passed, and then after that he came and he said, you know, asked us, what have you done? So, well, there was nothing to show, so we said, we have dissected the inguinal ring. And he said, oh, that must be a very precious ring. You took 3 hours to dissect that. His tutorials and his lectures would always be interspersed with anecdotes and stories about how to give answers in Viva. Maybe I can tell you another story about. Yes, so he was preparing us for the final exam Vivas, and he was telling us that if you get asked a question, you must answer it completely. You know, so he gave us an example. He said there was one particular GMCITE who went to the Viva and he was asked, what is the nerve supply of the tongue? So this guy looked at the examiner and said, hypoglossal nerve, which is the correct answer. And the examiner said, yes. And he said, hypoglossal nerve. He said, yeah, the hypoglossal nerve supplies a part of the tongue. Now what supplies the palatoglossus? So he thought and said, vagus. Yeah, you're right. So the GMCITE feels, boss, doing very well. And then the examiner says, this is the motor supply. What about the sensory supply? And he looks at the examiner and says, facial? So he said, yes, you are correct. Now facial supplies the anterior part. What about the posterior part? He again looks at the examiner and says, glossopharyngeal? So he said, yeah, you are right, glossopharyngeal. And then the examiner sends him out. And then this guy comes out and says, and his friends ask him, boss, how was the viva? Usne bola, arey, tod dala. You know, all questions I answered, which is correct. He answered all the questions correctly. Dharab says, it's not tod dala. You know, you have not done well. If you ask the question, you have to give the answer. Motor supplies, sensory supply, different parts. And he always had stories whenever he taught us. So we remember things, you know, vividly. So that's one person I remember from my undergraduate days.
So in the final year of your young days, you mentioned about you had mentors like Dr. Kapoor, honorary professors, Dr. Pardia. What about them? So what you learned from them?
So when I was doing my residency, or even during our undergraduate years, we had some real top doctors teaching us. We had Dr. O.P. Kapoor, who very sadly passed away a few weeks ago. He would take lectures for us. He was an honorary in the medical wards. We had Dr. Narula. We had Dr. Tempton Udvadia. Again, very sadly, he passed away just a few days ago. And Dr. H.G. Doctor. All these doctors, like for example, the surgeons, their initials were MS, FRCS. So I would look at these guys, they were my role models, and that's how I decided that even I wanted FRCS after my name, and to do that I had to go to the UK. So that's how I decided I wanted to go to the UK. So when I was an undergraduate student, these were the doctors. Looking at them, I got the inspiration that after my...
How did you decide in your early life, in your early days life, that you want to become a cardiothoracic surgeon and not in aerospace?
So I honestly cannot answer this question. It was very early on in my life. As a medical student, I decided to be a cardiac surgeon. In fact, in first year, you know, like when I was exactly your age in first MBBS, I decided I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. I had no idea what cardiac surgeons did. I had no idea what cardiac surgery was all about. Maybe I must have seen something on television, or I must have read something in the newspaper, but I just wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. And I also remember when, you know, we used to have the 5th floor canteen in JJ Hospital. I don't know if it's still there. When I was a resident doctor, and if there were cardiac surgical residents sitting on one of the benches, I would go and try and sit next to them. I didn't know them, but just to hear what they was talking about, you know. So I was interested in cardiac surgery. I don't know the reason why, and I always wanted to be a cardiac surgeon.
You are doing it till now with full energy and
yes, I love my job, you know. So it's not a job, it's love basically.
It's rightly said, once you start doing what you love, you don't have to work a single day. So, sir, I want to dive into another problem that we are facing now. So nowadays the saturation of doctors is increasing in urban areas and even in the periphery. So how does this culture of GMC help us to stand out of the crowd? What are your views here?
So I think in GMC, our clinical training is very, very good, you know. There was no BMR. Do you know what BMR stands for? Basics mein rada. You must make sure that none of you have BMR. Your fundamentals have to be clear in anatomy, physiology, pathology. And I think we did that in Grant Medical College, and when we went to work in JJ Hospital or St. George's Hospital, we had a lot of clinical material. So we became good clinicians.
You have a very famous story about bird that was used in past in GMC. That's the Hatachindi.
Oh, Hatachindi, yes, we were talking about. So do you guys use the word Hatachindi? It was very common in my time in the 1980s in Grant Medical College. Hatachindi, you know, if there's a problem that you cannot immediately solve or you don't want to think about it, you say Hatachindi. Like, you know, if you are in the boys' common room playing chess, or if you have not submitted your coursework and somebody comes and tells you, boss, that lecturer was very angry at you today. And then your friend will say, Hatachindi, chalo. You know, I'll tell you another story. When I wanted to go to the UK, so I had applied for a visa to go to the UK. And when I submitted my application form, there was an interview. And the interviewer came and asked me, what are your plans after the PLAB exam? I said, I'll come back to India after my exam, because that's what we were told. That's what you have to say. So we said that. And he said, what if you don't come back? I said, I will come back. And then he said, where are you going to stay? I said, with my uncle. He said, your uncle went to UK and he didn't come back. And he was doing this. He didn't come back. What if you don't come back? And I said, I will come back. And he kept on asking me again and again, 3 or 4 times. And the 5th time he said, what if you don't come back? I said, if I don't come back, I don't come back. I will work there. But wherever I work, I will do good work. So it should not be a problem. And then he looked at me and he said, well, go and have a seat there. And this was about 10 or 11 in the morning. And then there was a lunch break. Other people who had come for their visas got called. They got their passports back one by one, and the office was shutting at 4:30. By 4:15, I had still not been called, and I had given up hopes of getting the visa. So I was just sitting there, and I said, "Hata chindi yaar, nahi jayega UK." So I started making plans for the FMG exam, which in those days was held in Singapore. India was not a center. So I made a timetable. This is August now. In January, I will go to Singapore to give my FMG exams, and I will go to the USA. So no problem, hata chindi. And then after a few minutes, he called me. My name was called. I went there, and he gave me the passport, and I checked again, and there was the visa to go to the UK. And I said, boss, good.
You finally got the visa.
I finally got the visa. So the thing to do is, you have to do what you have to do. But if this plan A doesn't work, there should always be a plan B. You should do something and forget about.
So there is a learning behind it, guys. Give your best and hata chindi the rest.
Hata chindi, exactly.
Sir, was coming back to India ever a plan?
So I always wanted to come back to India. My plan was to go there, learn lots of cardiac surgery, and then come back. And my dream was to work in Bombay Hospital. In those days, Bombay Hospital was one of the top hospitals in Mumbai. And my dream was to get an attachment in Bombay Hospital. So I actually went to UK in 1991. I did cardiac surgery, and in 1999-2000 I completed my training, and I actually got an attachment in Bombay Hospital, and my plan was to come back to Mumbai. And my wife and my daughter, I had one daughter at that time, they came back. My daughter got admission in a school in Chembur. My wife informed me that she is pregnant with the second child, and then we thought, we've lived in the UK for so long, our second child would be born in October, so why don't we wait for a few more months. So we decided to wait for a few more months. By that time I became a consultant in the UK. I was only 34 years old, and I found it very good, the ability to do lots of good quality work, do research, take part in clinical studies. And then I got tempted to stay there, and I stayed there. So I don't regret coming back. I don't know what would have been if I had come back. I'm sure I'd have done well here, but I'm happy there as well.
It was an organic decision, yes. Till now, it seems kind of a fairy tale that you're getting into the GMC for your MBBS or settling in the UK after your post-graduation. But I'm sure that it must be a roller coaster ride with full ups and downs. Could you share some of those events with us?
Talking about ups and downs. Well, talking about downs, I think when I was growing up, we were a very close-knit family. My mum was a GP, my dad was a professor in management studies, and I had 2 younger brothers. So we were a close-knit family, and we looked after each other, and my parents, brought us up very well. So I don't really think there were any downs. And the thing about joining medicine also was not, was my dad's decision. So unlike now in the 1980s, if you were good at studies, the good students always went to medicine or engineering, and if you didn't get admission in medicine or engineering, then you did something else. And I was good in studies. I always got good marks. So, and I wanted to maybe become an engineer or a doctor, but more likely my inclination was towards doing engineering. And I actually sat the IIT exams, and I got a good rank in IIT, and I got admission into IIT Bombay. That was one of the, at that time IIT Bombay and Kharagpur were good centers. So I managed to get into IIT Powai. And then 15 days later, the 12th standard marks came. So my dad looked at the results and said, Vipin, tu doctor ban. So I said, okay, you'll become a doctor. So we filled in a form for medicine, and that was it. I was not forced to come into medicine, definitely not. And for me, it was okay. In 1982, a 17-year-old would not have as much knowledge about everything as people have today. And even the story about coming to GMC. So when we came for our counseling, we filled in the application form. In those days, there were only 4 medical colleges. GS was the best. So all the toppers went to GS. Then when GS seats were filled, they went to TNMC. When TNMC seats were filled, they went to Lokmanya Tilak Sion. And then when all those seats were filled, people would come to Grand Medical College. So when my turn came, and I was quite higher up on the list, my turn came, there was seats still available in GS Medical College. But my dad there said, Vipin, you go to GMC. So I said, okay, we go to GMC. And there were 4 tables over there. So the 3 tables with GS, LTMMC and TNMC had people sitting on there. The GMC table was empty because they were not expecting candidates to come to GMC that early. So we had to wait 5 or 10 minutes till they called that person, come, somebody wants to go to GMC. So, and then I went there and I remember that person asking me, Pakka GMC na? I said, yes, Pakka GMC. And I got admission into GMC. And so those are the 2 decisions my dad took for me, which I'm so grateful to him for. I have had a very nice career in medicine. So I'm so grateful that he decided I'll come into medicine. I'm so grateful that he decided I should come to GMC. I had the best time of my life here.
Was your father's decision to persuade you to take medical as a career and even GMC?
So he didn't persuade me. He just suggested and I said yes. So persuasion is when I'm reluctant and he then persuades me. It was not like that. He said, Doctor okay, Doctor Banega, no problems.
Apart from this, how was your relationship with your father?
He passed away at a very young age, but I had a great time with my dad. My dad always used to teach me about lateral thinking, keeping an open mind, never saying no to anything in life. Consider that as a possibility. You don't have to do it, but at least think about it with an open mind.
The second way, plan B.
Plan B is always an option. I'll tell you another story about the NTS scholarship. Any of you NTS scholars here? It's a scholarship given by the National Council of Educational Research and Training. And I remember I was in 10th standard in school, and I saw on the notice board that that was the last day for filling in applications for the NTS scholarship. So, and I went to the school office and said, I want to fill the form, and they said there are no forms. So anyway, I said, bad luck, no problem. So I came home, and fortunately, my dad was at home that afternoon, and I told him about the NTS scholarship. He had not heard about it, but I said, today is the last date. So he said, okay, well, we'll go to Junjunwala College in Ghatkopar, was very close to where we stayed. He said he knows somebody in Junjunwala College. Let's go there and see if the forms can be filled. So we went there, and luckily the forms were available. So I filled the form, and he also had said when we left our house that let's take passport size photos with us because you might need them. So when we went there, actually you needed 2 passport size photos, one for the form and one for the ID that they would send you. So we filled the form in just an hour before the deadline, and then a few months later there was the exam. I gave the exam, then there was the interview. I gave the interview, and then I was selected for the NTS scholarship. So 11th and 12th standard I used to get 150 rupees a month. And when I was a medical student like you, I used to get 400 rupees a month as scholarship. And 400 rupees in those days was a lot of money. It is like equivalent to 20,000 rupees maybe today. So that was a lot of money the government used to give me for being an NTS scholar.
As you told us that your father had taken influence in your life, teaching you the various things like lateral thinking and choosing your career, everything. So how does your father's mind affected you, and what was the lowest point in your life?
So the lowest point in my life was in 1992. I was in Southampton. I was a junior doctor. I was working as a senior house officer. That's the junior most post in the hierarchy. And suddenly I got a phone call saying my dad had passed away. He was only 53 years old. He was in Ghatkopar in Mumbai, and apparently he had a heart attack and he just passed away. So I think that was the lowest point in my life, and I can't think of any other event in my 57 years of existence that comes anywhere near that. And it was very sad news, and I had to come back to Mumbai. I had 2 younger brothers and my mom, they were in Ghatkopar. And then also, even at that moment of grief, I didn't want to just come back immediately. I knew that I could stay in Bombay for 3 3 weeks. So I delayed coming. My dad passed away on the 19th of December. So instead of coming on the 20th, I decided to come on the 28th so that I could stay with my mom for a bit longer till the 17th of January, I just delayed it a little bit.
Yeah. Sir, how do you find your way through all this emotional dynamics?
I think there is no formula for it. You just have to make your way through. You have to believe in yourself, and the years of preparation that you do in the past actually comes of use to you later on. You don't prepare for an exam the month before the exam. What you have done 2 years ago, 3 years before, that all comes of use.
So, coming back to your practice in UK, what were your other ventures in the field of cardiothoracic surgery when you were in UK in those days?
Early on I got interested in off-pump surgery. I had actually come to Mumbai in the year 2000, and Nitu Manke, have any of you heard of Dr. Nitu Manke? He was a very famous cardiac surgeon in Mumbai. Sadly, he also passed away at a very young age. He was a very famous cardiac surgeon, and he was speaking about off-pump surgery, and I asked him, can I come to your theatres to see you doing off-pump surgery? And I went to, I think, Lilavati Hospital. I went to his theatres, I saw off-pump surgery, and when I went back to UK, this was March 2000, I started doing off-pump surgery in Cardiff, and I was one of the first surgeons in Cardiff to start doing off-pump surgery. In fact, very few surgeons in the UK were doing off-pump surgery at that time. So I started doing it, and it is, what I basically saw Nitu Manke doing, I started doing over there, and I've been doing that for a number of years.
So, please tell us about Zamvar's pericardial fold.
So I'll show you the video later on, but when you do off-pump surgery, it is actually operating on a beating heart. One of the first steps in the operation is you have to take a suture behind the heart in the pericardium, and then you have to lift up the pericardium, and that way you lift up the heart, and that causes less hemodynamic problems when you actually operate on the heart. And you have to keep the suture behind the heart, and there were other surgeons who had described their techniques of where to put the sutures. So when I was working in Cardiff, I was experimenting with which would be the ideal location to put the suture, and at that time I came across a fold of pericardium over the inferior pulmonary vein and the superior pulmonary vein, and I realized that if I put a stitch over there, that is the best place to put a stitch to lift the heart up and have minimum hemodynamic compromise to the heart. And then I also realized that that particular fold of the pericardium had never been described in the anatomical or the surgical literature. So I would go to different meetings and talk about my techniques of doing off-pump surgery, and I would describe this fold and I would describe the suture. And then one of the surgeons from Oxford, he suggested to me, why don't you write it up? He would call it the Zamvar pericardial fold. So I said, yes, I will write it up, and I wrote it up, and that's how the name Zamvar pericardial fold came.
This was in the year?
I've been using the pericardial stitch over the fold since 2003 and 2004, but it's only in 2017 that I wrote it up, and I was invited to come to Astana in Kazakhstan to give the WSCTS eponymous lecture on the Zamvar pericardial fold. So it's been just described in 2017, but I had been using it, the stitch, since 2004 or 2005.
So in the light of Zamvar's pericardial fold, we would like to know about the framework of scientific inquiry which leads to such medical innovations or discoveries. Like what it takes or what it requires to make such innovations.
So you can't discover something. You can't start saying, oh, I'm going to discover something, and you start looking for it. Mainly it's serendipity. You're doing your own job and something comes up, and by chance you make the connection. So I would say the best thing is to keep your ears and eyes open all the time. Take in as much information as you can, and try and keep your always have an insight and see if there's any connection. And if you can do that, luck will favor you. And also luck, no person is actually lucky. Luck favors only the person who is well prepared. So you must always be well prepared, no matter what you're doing, whether your studies or your exams or your anatomy dissections. You should be on top of what is happening in your class and maybe a few steps ahead. And you should always be prepared for any exam. The preparation doesn't start a month before. It should start many months before. And as long as you are very well prepared, when the opportunity comes, and opportunity will come to everybody, when opportunity knocks, and if you recognize the opportunity and you are well prepared, then you are lucky, and luck will favor you. As they say, luck favors the prepared mind. And so luck is preparation plus opportunity, and there was lucky. So this Zamvar pericardial fold is something, it was just observation and then a chance to describe it. And in the modern era, dissection started in the 15th and 16th century in Italy, Leonardo da Vinci, and they started dissection. So in these 500 years, many surgeons and many anatomists must have seen that fold, but they must not have noticed it,
And you were prepared and you got an opportunity.
Yeah, and I just described it luckily, Yeah.
Excellent, sir. Our viewers would like to know your advice about medical education and practice in foreign countries.
So, I only have experience about working in the UK, and in the UK we have the National Health Service. So, medical treatment is free for everybody in the NHS. And I think that is the best system in the world. So whether you're rich or poor, whether whatever treatment you need is available to you, it's free at the point of delivery. In America, there is the insurance system, so you need insurance, which is, in America is a rich country, but many people can't afford medical care. I think India is a mixed system. We have free medical care in the government hospitals, but the majority of people have private care. I hope India becomes financially prosperous very soon in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I hope our economic standard is as good as UK, as other developed countries, and we should also have the NHS equivalent in our country, in India.
We also know that, sir. Sir, what are the difficulties or the problems that such medical practitioners face from India and foreign countries in their initial years?
So it's in the initial year, it's you go to a new country, it's a new culture, the language is new, the nuances are new. So there are difficulties, but they are not insurmountable, and there is a lot of support available to any of you who decide to come to the UK. There are peer groups, and of course, being GMCITEs, you are a special group, because the GMCITEs who are there will look after you, or will help you whenever help is needed. But I would advise, when you are young, you must travel. After you finish your MBBS or your MS or MD, you must travel to different countries, you must see different cultures, because when you are young, you can travel. Further on in life, when you are married and when you have kids, it's difficult to move.
As you mentioned about GMCITEs, helping GMCITEs in other countries, sir, is there any story about how you help the GMCITE, how a GMCITE helped you?
So when I was preparing for the PLAB exam, when I finished my MS, I started preparing for the PLAB exam, and we used to sit in the library and spend hours just going through the PLAB MCQs, etc. And when I first went to the UK in August 91, so there were a couple of GMCITEs who had already passed the PLAB, and they said, they used to call me Z, my friends still call me Z, and said, Z, we have all this material. So the GMCITEs who are there gave me a lot of material, which helped me and which I have passed on to other GMCITEs. So help is there, the GMCITEs.
GMCITEs helping you to stand out of the crowd. What should be the approach of medical students in India who are facing or who are planning for the practice in foreign countries?
So I would say plan early. And if you have to go to the US, you would have to give the FMG or the equivalent exam, which is the USMLE. Or if you're going to do the PLAB, it's mainly a clinical exam. You can start planning early, and especially I would advise everybody to do their MD or MS over here, because when you're an undergraduate student, you're actually just learning the basics of medicine. You're not actually becoming a doctor. Your main training and your main education starts when you start seeing patients on your own, or when you start working as house officers or registrars, and that's when your main clinical training starts. And the kind of training that you will get in a government hospital in India, that cannot be compared with any other kind of training anywhere else in the world. You'll get excellent training here. You'll get a lot of clinical material. And once you've finished your 3 years training here, then the world is your oyster. Then you can go. And that's the time I would advise you to, if you want to come to the UK, to give the PLAB exam and come.
Okay, sir. Sir, there is a growing notion that CVTS is a dying branch. What do you have to say on that, sir?
So, I don't think it's a dying branch, and I have heard this for, I've been hearing this now for 30 years. So every time there is an innovation in the field of cardiology, they say, oh, this is the end of cardiac surgery. When stents came in the 1990s, they said coronary surgery will go away. When TAVI came in the year 2000, 2002, they said that is the end of aortic valve replacement. But cardiac surgery continues to grow, surgeons continue to innovate, the workload still continues to increase. So I don't think cardiac surgery is a dying branch. If any of you are interested in cardiac surgery, I think the future is very, very bright. I know there are lots of medical seats in India which are going vacant. So there it is your opportunity. You can select the best place to go because those seats are vacant anyway. So
absolutely, sir. Your talk will encourage many of us to pursue the field, cardiothoracic. Sir, what according to you is a culture of GMC that we all talk about?
So the culture of GMC is, we have a special bonding. When I came to this college, on the first day, the dean, Dr. Devdhare, told us, you guys are special, you are GMCITEs, and we always had that special feeling. We had that Chakaraka. No other college has that. Especially in a foreign country, if you meet a GMCITE, suddenly you have this feeling, this affection for this GMCITE.
Absolutely, sir. After this talk, we are also going to be Chakaraka. Okay. So, this was a conversation with one of the surgeons who entered this field actually and went on to become a pioneer of medical innovation in the field of cardiothoracic surgery. I think it deserves a great honor.